The Karates had studied human combat for 3 standard cycles. Their tactical computers had analyzed thousands of hours of footage, dissected every documented skirmish, and formulated what they believed to be the perfect counter-strategy. Commander Zethric stood before the holographic display in the war room, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction as he reviewed the data one final time. Humans rely on technology, he announced to his assembled officers. Remove their advanced weaponry, and they become vulnerable prey. Annie Reeves had heard similar assessments before. As humanity's liaison to the Galactic Council's security forces, she'd sat through countless briefings where alien strategists dismissed human capabilities. They saw patterns in human warfare: the reliance on cover, the predictable tactical formations, the standard issue plasma rifles that most soldiers carried. What they failed to understand was that humans were adaptable, and Annie was about to teach them a lesson in improvisation. The training exercise was meant to be straightforward. The karate had challenged humanity to a simulated combat scenario, a neutral ground test, to evaluate combat readiness for the upcoming joint peacekeeping mission. Annie volunteered immediately, much to the confusion of her superiors. She was a cultural liaison, not a frontline soldier. But Annie had grown up in the dusty plains of New Arizona, where her grandfather had taught her skills that predated plasma weapons by centuries. Massey Chen, her partner and the expedition's chief engineer, tried to dissuade her at the transport dock. His dark eyes were filled with concern as he adjusted the strap of her equipment bag. "Annie, you don't have to prove anything to these aliens," Massey said, his voice low. "Let the combat specialists handle this." Annie smiled, that familiar glint of mischief dancing in her green eyes. "Massey, sometimes the best way to teach is through demonstration. Besides, they specifically requested traditional human combat capabilities. They have no idea what they're asking for." "That's exactly what worries me," Massey muttered. But he knew better than to argue when Annie had made up her mind. He'd fallen in love with that stubborn determination years ago, during their academy days, when she'd insisted on taking apart and rebuilding a malfunctioning fusion reactor that everyone else had written off as unsalvageable. The arena was a converted cargo bay, large enough to accommodate various terrain simulations. The karate had programmed an urban environment: crumbling buildings, narrow alleyways, and multiple elevation points, perfect for their ambush tactics. Commander Zethric and his team of 5 elite warriors positioned themselves according to their battle algorithms, confident that their superior strength, speed, and numbers would overwhelm any single human opponent. Annie entered from the opposite end, and the collective reaction from the observing alien dignitaries was audible. Instead of the expected tactical armor and plasma rifle, she wore simple combat fatigues and a leather duster that seemed absurdly antiquated. At her hips hung 2 revolvers, actual chemical propellant firearms that looked like museum pieces. Massey watched from the observation deck, his hands gripping the railing. He'd seen those weapons before, carefully maintained relics that Annie's grandfather had passed down through 3 generations. She'd spent countless hours at the range, practicing draws and reloads until the movements became pure muscle memory. "What is the meaning of this?" Zethric's voice boomed through the arena's calm system. "Those primitive weapons are no match for karate combat prowess." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Annie replied calmly, her hands resting casually near her holsters. "Begin when ready, Commander." The karate commander signaled his warriors. They moved with practiced precision, executing a pincer maneuver designed to overwhelm their target from multiple angles. Their combat theory dictated that humans needed time to aim, time to fire, time to react. Their exoskeletons would absorb any projectile damage from such primitive weapons, and their superior reflexes would close the distance before she could pose a real threat. They were wrong. Annie's hands moved in a blur that defied the karate tactical computer's predictions. Both revolvers cleared leather in a single fluid motion, and the arena exploded with sound. Not the quiet hum of plasma weapons, but the thunderous roar of gunpowder igniting. The first karate warrior's shield generator shorted out, as a .45 caliber round punched through its housing, a weak point in the technology. Designed to deflect energy weapons, not kinetic projectiles, she moved like water, rolling behind cover as return fire scorched the air where she'd been standing. 2 more shots rang out, each finding its mark with precision that seemed impossible. The second warrior's helmet display cracked, forcing a tactical retreat. Annie didn't give them time to regroup. Massey had seen her shoot targets, but watching her in actual combat was something else entirely. She moved through the urban terrain like a ghost, using angles and momentum that the karate hadn't programmed into their simulations. Every shot was deliberate, conserving ammunition in a way that modern soldiers with virtually unlimited plasma charges never bothered to learn. The third warrior attempted to flank her from an elevated position. Annie's response was instantaneous, a calculated shot that ricocheted off a metal beam and caught the karate in the shoulder joint of his armor, disabling his primary weapon arm. The watching aliens gasped. Humans weren't supposed to be capable of such precision with primitive weaponry. Commander Zethric watched his carefully constructed combat theory crumble in real time. His warriors were trained to fight enemies who relied on technology, who needed targeting systems and power cores. Annie fought with instinct, skill, and weapons that required nothing but her own ability. When his fourth warrior charged her position, confident in his superior strength, Annie simply sidestepped, used his momentum against him, and delivered a well-placed strike that sent him crashing into a wall. The fifth warrior hesitated, and that hesitation was fatal to his chances. Annie's revolvers spoke again, disabling his weapon and shield in quick succession. In less than 3 minutes, 5 elite karate warriors had been neutralized by a single human armed with what they'd considered obsolete technology. The arena fell silent except for Annie's steady breathing as she calmly reloaded both revolvers. Massey couldn't help but grin as he watched the alien dignitaries scramble to recalculate their entire assessment of human combat capabilities. Commander Zethric emerged from cover, his mandibles drooping in what Massey recognized as the karate equivalent of profound shock. How? Our models predicted. Annie holstered her weapons with practiced ease. Your models assumed we'd fight like you fight. That's the first mistake any warrior makes, assuming your enemy thinks like you do. As Annie exited the arena, Massey was waiting with a water bottle and a knowing smile. So, did you make your point? She took a long drink before answering. Sometimes, Massey, the old ways work because they're built on principles that don't change. Technology fails, systems crash, but skill? She patted the revolvers at her hips. Skill endures. The Galactic Council's combat assessment reports would require significant revision, and across 100 worlds, military academies would begin studying what became known as the Reeves Doctrine, the understanding that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, but their unpredictability, adaptability, and the depth of knowledge they carried from their entire history. Annie Reeves had taught the galaxy a valuable lesson. Never underestimate a human with a plan, especially one armed with 2 revolvers and the skill to use them.